Hey everybody, this is Nephi Cole from the Your Mountain Podcast. We're excited to share some upcoming information about a few new sponsors, but you'll have to wait for that. First, we want to say thank you to Vortex Optics, Gunwerks, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Federal Premium Ammunition, and Viking Tactics, who have been longtime supporters and strategic partners. We also need to say this. The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Your Mountain Podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. I've got Mike McGrady. I'm going to start with Mike because he's here today. I want to give him a chance to speak.
I got nothing.
Oh, I guess we'll see you in a few weeks.
He talks
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Yep. Do what I can.
Yeah. Nephi Cole,
I'm here.
You're here today.
Still here, Dave.
Still here. Yeah.
100 plus episodes later, still here.
Yeah. So, and I am too. Hey, so this doesn't matter to Mike at all because he wasn't involved in this.
Yeah.
But Nephi, I just saw something from one of our listeners. You know how we've applied for that mountain goat hunt?
Yes, I do.
Or not hunt, mountain goat cull.
Yes.
In Grand Teton National Park. Well, one of our listeners has heard that he drew that. And we have not heard anything yet.
Well,
we got our rejection months ago.
Yeah.
So he had to pass like some sort of test with the National Park Service on hunting skills or something. So I could see why you two didn't get in, but
that's funny.
Do you have
not
any,
true,
any
but that's
sort of-
okay.
oh.
You know, I understand where you were going with that joke. That is clearly a falsehood. But
So Mike, I'm not going to be able to help you haul your elk out this year now.
Yeah, I understand.
But I'm happy to help you
shoot it
hunt
next
for a new
to the road.
backpack.
Okay. All right.
But seriously, somebody found out just today that they drew. And so
How'd they find out? Email? What? They call them?
Yeah, they got an email from the Park Service.
Oh, it looks like
And
I should
so
check
I've been
my
hitting
email.
refresh. Yeah, I'm just hitting refresh constantly, but I haven't seen anything. So we're still kind of sitting here on our hands wondering if we drew or not.
You know, this is a real interesting thing, though, because I sat and thought about it. And actually, one of my friends, a guy who works at Gunwerks, Landon Michaels, and I were discussing it. And so Landon and I were discussing this issue because, you know, the mountain goat cull, just how kind of strange it is because, I mean, really, from a hunting perspective, we're all about, you know, hunting. But this is somewhat different than that because, you know, it's unlimited. Like you get into a herd of goats, they want you to shoot them all. Everything that you see. And then recovery wise, you know, I know we mentioned this. It's like they encourage you to recover the animal if you can, but it's actually not required. And so that's just
Right.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing there.
Like, don't risk your life over it, but if you can get it out of there, you really should try to.
Yes, that's kind of what they say. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Because you're gonna be in that kind of terrain where
so I'm going to pretend.
you may have an ethical shot. You may take that shot and kill that mountain goat, and then you may have an unretrievable mountain goat.
Yeah.
And
So I'm just
they're
gonna
okay
act
with that.
I'm just going to act like it's for moral superior reasons that I didn't even want to go anyway.
Oh, well, you can do whatever you want. I really want to go.
Okay.
I'm going to be pretty bummed when we either don't get any message at all, or we get that message that says you were not selected. It's pretty much going to ruin my fall. I've had my hopes up. And I know we talked about it before as being like the Powerball lottery and we're just having fun with it. And we recognize that
You should get over
it's
it.
really just in our imagination. But now that we know somebody has drawn, I'm going to be super disappointed if I don't draw.
You'd have had a lot of problems with that 200-yard shot anyway.
That's 4 times longer than the shots I normally take.
Yeah, I mean,
But
that's
think I could
really,
pull it off.
you're really stretching your capability factor there. And not just for you, but the old Ruger. I mean, let's just be honest. You're climbing up the mountain, sling breaks off, gun hits the rocks a few times, unknown whether or not that Simmons scope is going to be, you know, have held zero. So it's kind of like
It's not even a Simmons scope, man.
Yeah, but if Dave had like a nickel for every time that has happened.
I was like, you just described every hunt I've ever been on.
Which explains the whole stalking within, powder burn range. I get it.
I don't use the scope. I mean, it's sort of, I look right under the scope or right next to the scope.
You don't need to correct
You just point at hair. Yeah, you just point at hair.
I don't use the scope thing is believable to me coming from you. I'll take it.
It's actually I think I mentioned it before. It's a Pro Hunter scope. And
that
I don't even
like professional hunting.
I don't know if that's a legitimate brand or if it's a product of some other company, but it's,
what are you going to say? It's Pro.
Right. Pro Hunter. And anything with Pro in it has to be top quality.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned.
I had some shoes that said Pro on them once. What was that? What was the Payless athletic shoe brand when you were a little kid?
Pro Staff?
I don't know.
Oh, anyway, that's
tennis.
I don't know. But
tennis, golf. Yeah.
It's interesting that you should bring that up. First of all, the mountain goat hunt. Second of all, being a pro hunter and the hunting ethics. Because today we kind of want to briefly talk about an article, and we'll get into it. But there's an article that came out in Boone and Crockett's Fair Chase last year, but it started making its rounds of the internet again this year. And I commented on it on my Facebook feed, but I also noticed that Aaron Davidson of Gunwerks commented on the same article. And the article, I believe, was called Technology, Please Enjoy Responsibly. And then the details of the article we'll get into. But without further ado, as I was sitting there, I was like, who'd have an interesting take on this? I immediately picked up my cell phone because I saw his comments, and I called Aaron and I said, hey, Aaron, tell me what you think about this. So with that, our guest today, Aaron Davidson, CEO of Gunwerks. Is that the right title, Aaron? We say
that works.
Creator, wizard, maker, father of all those things.
Sure, works. All works.
Which one do you prefer at Gunwerks? What do you make everybody call you?
If I'm actually writing it out, I'm going to use CEO, but that one seems a little facetious. So founder is fine.
I was just wondering if you make Landon when he sees you if there's like a salute that he has to give you in the hallway or something like that.
No, I don't go down to the lower levels that often.
Yeah, that makes sense. That Landon character, it gets pretty rough down in his office from what I've seen. It's there's dead animals in there. There's all sorts of stuff in there.
Yeah.
So Aaron, thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So Aaron, so first of all, did you put in for the Grand Teton Mountain Goat thing?
We did.
Yeah.
And you know that part where it says, describe your hunting experience? I said, come on, man, I'm Aaron Davidson. And apparently that didn't work.
That wasn't enough. So then you said, how many pages do you want? Was that the next thing that you responded? Like you started?
I actually think I said supplemental information can be provided if needed.
Yeah. And it was just like volumes.
Yeah.
So Aaron, what's your background?
The highlights, the good parts are engineering background, got totally into guns, went nuts over it, started a business in this space just because I have lots of passion for guns, products, shooting, science, all that stuff.
So before that, you're Wyoming native.
Correct.
How does a Wyoming native, what's your, when did you start hunting? What gets you into hunting?
I remember talking the old man into taking me and my brother hunting. I was probably 13. Mike had just turned 12. We're about a year apart. And so this was our first go. We were in Burlington, so just outside of Cody, and wanted to go hunt deer. And so we talked him into getting us a Marlin 30-30 lever action.
I like it.
And so we were in business, and I could hit a bullseye at 100 yards with that thing. So we went hunting and kind of got hooked and kind of grew up hunting together and chasing deer and doing fun stuff that way.
So did your dad hunt before, or was it like you guys are first generation?
No, he did hunt, but he didn't like it. Like he'd been hunting before, but it just wasn't his thing.
Yeah.
So we just did not do. After the kind of that first introduction and kind of kickoff, Dad kind of regretted maybe what he got started, I think.
So that's funny because my dad was kind of the same way. And I have my first hunting rifle is a Winchester Model 88 and 308, which is a kind of a unique bolt action, not bolt, but lever gun as well.
Mhm.
And so, but yeah, and I just kind of about the same age, and I'm sort of my kind of skipped a generation. My grandfather was a big time hunter, my uncle, but not my dad. So, so how do you go from a 30-30 into interest in like, how does it grow from there to where a guy who owns a gun company?
How I really got into guns was college. I was through high school. I was a car guy. I figured that fast cars with nice paint jobs would help me chase girls. And so I was into cars like big time. Well, what's funny is I never actually finished any cars. I had lots of car projects. I always had to date girls that had cars because my cars never went anywhere.
So you never actually got to test the theory.
I never did. And by the time I started getting cars done, I was literally married and in college starting a family, and I started finishing some cars. I'm like, okay, well, this doesn't do any good. So I started selling cars. And I could sell a car for say $7,000 to $10,000, and then I could go buy a rifle for like $1,000, put a scope on it. I was going to school in Laramie, and I did my work in the summertime. So you take 14, 16 credit hours, and then what do you do for the rest of the week? So I would load ammo and go shoot it, or go fishing, one of the two. Anyways, I had a lot of fun there, but I did a lot of shooting at that time. And then combined with that engineering curriculum, I was always thinking, well, how does that apply to guns or cars or whatever, but how does it apply to guns? And then I got more and more into the science of firearms and, the gun mags, and I was all in everything. So, I mean, I would seek to acquire that next firearm purchase. That's what happened to me in college.
No, that's cool. I kind of geek out myself. And about the same age, when I was in college, unfortunately, I spent a lot of time in those off hours. I was making Domino's pizzas instead of shooting and hunting. But I did spend a whole lot of time reading and learning, and that's kind of where my interest in it came in. And I also, I don't think we've ever talked about this, but I've restored some old stuff and old Broncos and Mustangs and things like that. And same thing, end up selling them. But I've always been really interested in mechanical things and how things work. And still, I think one of the things that really attracts me to certain firearms, and specifically accurate firearms, is there's just kind of like the numbers of it, the magic of it, the machining of it, the tolerances of it. And it sounds like that's kind of similar to you, like that whole, that man and machine working together aspect of it.
And I'm curious if, the time you spent in Laramie at the range there, is that where you got your love for the long distance? Because I moved out from Florida, and the longest distance we had to sight a rifle in was 50 yards. And I moved to Laramie, and I'm like, what's 1,000 yards? How do you even try that? That's the longest range I'd ever seen at the time.
Well, so when you first get into guns, and I don't want to say when you're a beginner in guns, but I'm kind of implying that. I know that's going to cause some problems. But when you're early into guns, the thing that's really interesting is how precise you can shoot. So you spend all your time at like 100 or 200 yards, and you're shooting groups, right? And you're reloading, you're breaking in guns, you're setting up scopes, you're getting things zeroed, you're testing different loads, and how small can I get the group? And we have this debate all the time, but at some point, I feel like you mature beyond that, and you realize that, small groups are really interesting, but the big challenge in shooting is being accurate at distance. It's like, can I put that bullet on that target, or can I place that bullet on an animal where I want to at the distance that I'm shooting? And that becomes the big challenge. And there's way more, I would say, in my opinion, there's way more effort that needs to be expended in that side of shooting. a bigger challenge, bigger effort, bigger opportunity for failure. And so for me, that's the part that I started gravitating to.
You don't know Darcy Eccles, do you?
Sure.
Yeah. So actually, it's funny. I was at the range, volunteer range officer in Logan, Utah, and basically that's how I paid to go shoot. It's because I didn't want to pay for a membership there. So I was a volunteer range officer, and I was shooting a Winchester Model 70, and just super frustrated that I couldn't get better groups than like I was tennis ball size groups, and that was no matter what I did, and that was my introduction to accurizing rifles and becoming a better shooter. Was that Darcy was there working on one of his custom guns, and sat down with me for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then walked me through and like made a plan and helped me learn how to accurize my, a Model 70. And then he told me to take the Pro Hunter scope off the top, Dave, and to throw it away. It was like the first thing he told me to do. And then the same thing with the stock, by the way, the plastic, recycled milk jug stock. But it's kind of, it's interesting to me to hear that at that period of time in your life, you were discovering all these things about firearms. I'm curious how you go from there to what is probably now, I would say, the most recognizable name in long-range accuracy in hunting rifles, which is Gunwerks. How does that happen?
Oh man, probably just lots and lots of hours of work and a lot of luck. We hit the market at the right time, where we were able to assemble a system and package up kind of an out-of-the-box concept for long range, and also produce videos that show the performance or the capabilities thereof, and just captured the market at the right time and was able to kind of leverage that early success into other unique product developments like the ballistic correcting rangefinder, the G7 BR series, and then also like into some later developments like the Revic rifle scope products. So
I think I'm curious if you had to put a number on it. Do you know how many rifles you've made to date?
We were chatting about that the other day. I would estimate over 25,000.
So, yeah, it's more than me. Dave, make any rifles lately?
No, I have not.
I think that background on your company is pretty important, and then because we were both reading the same article, this Boone and Crockett article, technology. Please enjoy responsibly. My comment on it was A+, food for thought. I'm going to quote your comment on it. Are you ready? Your comment on it was, I think it was Cliff Notes. Let's all use sticks and stones like our ancestors so we can all hunt and buy licenses without ever harvesting. Does that sound familiar to you? Does that sound correct?
That's exactly what I read when I read that article. That title of "Please Enjoy Responsibly," that didn't equal what they were saying in the content of the article to me, the way I read it. Now, you just heard what our whole company's based around, and what I've been doing in my life for the last 15 years. I'm a little sensitive to any type of restrictions or criticisms of the use of technology. So I'm a little hypersensitive. I'll admit that.
So what was your take? So my take on the article is this. I'm going to try and run it.
Hang on, go ahead, Nephi, really quick. Let me tee it up for you. Okay. Can you give a quick description of the article before you go into some sort of your assessment of it?
You're talking to me or Aaron?
I'm talking to you, Nephi.
That's what I was trying to do, Dave.
Oh, I didn't know you were going to talk about the article. I'm sorry. No, I thought you were going to give. Okay.
So my take on it was this. The article was basically talking about advances in technology. And what it said is, it was making, almost a counter argument that said, as you advance in technologies and you get more effective at getting animals, that's, my take was, it was insinuating that is a bad thing, because then that means that you're more likely to be successful. And so therefore there may be less opportunities for other people to have success or failure because you become more effective at what you're doing.
You become more effective at what you're doing. Therefore, the harvest rates come up. Therefore, the tag issuance has to go down.
Yes.
Which means there's less people that will draw tags and go to the field. And when I hear that, what I hear is this guy that says, I would rather go hunt every year for 10 years and only have a 10% chance of success, and 1 year out of those 10 years be successful. And when I read that, I'm like, well, why don't you just save everybody some trouble, take 9 years and go on a nature hike and just go hiking, because that's what you're doing. And then let's just limit the tag access. Let's increase our percentage so that when you do draw a tag, you know you're not going on a nature hike. You're going to go chase some animals.
It's kind of an interesting problem, isn't it? Because I mean, here's my take on it. Here's the response that I had, because I don't agree. Here's my personal bias, and here's where I have a problem with the idea that we should basically limit people's effectiveness at taking game. I have a problem with that. And my personal problem with that is this. I think anytime that I go into the field to harvest an animal, I want my chance of success when I put the sights on an animal to be as near 100% as I can possibly get. I am very uncomfortable with the thought that I'm going to be pointing a firearm at something, right? Here's the rules of firearm safety, right? We never point a gun at something that we're not intent at destroying, right? And so for me, the idea that I might pull that trigger and not have confidence in the outcome, that troubles me. I don't like that at all. And so that drives me to do a couple things. It drives me, number one, to try and get better, become a better hunter, have better fieldcraft. But it also relentlessly compels me. It's one of the things that really drives me to be obsessed with gear. Obsessed with having a better rifle, obsessed with having the best optic, rangefinder, all those types of things. And so that's where I run into problems with it, because some of the arguments that I hear about, about this idea of like, well, you don't want to be less effective. You got to give more of a chance to the animal. Like I have trouble buying into that concept, because I always feel like that in some ways, it's, I kind of get the sporting, like that somebody wants to treat it like a sport. They want to just treat it like as a, rather than, for me, I'm treating it as
there's a difference. There's a difference between sport and chance. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you 100%. The minute that you put crosshairs on that target and you consider breaking the shot, in my opinion, our ability with technology and understanding tools, etc., our abilities pretty much, in my opinion, demand that we have a very high hit probability to take that shot.
Yeah.
So if you don't do that, if you don't have, let's pick a number. Let's say 90% plus hit probability. Let's say there's a ethical threshold of that type of a requirement before you pull the trigger. So if there's you have to have a 90% chance of striking that animal well to satisfy the ethical requirements that we should impose on ourselves to hunt. Then I feel like the science should take over the minute that we decide to take that shot. And if you can't use those tools, and you think that increasing or decreasing the hit probability for that shot somehow equals a sporting opportunity for the animal, I completely disagree. I think taking a shot with low hit probability is unethical.
Well, can we break this discussion into two categories? Because I think we can talk about technology in a couple of different ways. And one being, the weapon of choice, right? The weapon that you use to take the animal and the ethics behind that decision, right? The other one is some of the other technologies that might be used in the field to try and gain a competitive advantage of sorts, or to improve your odds of taking the animal. And I actually think that's a squishier conversation than the weapon that you use in the field. I mean, from my perspective, you want to use the weapon that you're most comfortable with, that you have the highest probability of making the ethical kill at the range where you are, at the range where that animal is from you. And you want all the technology you can to make sure that you do the job right and that you're not making an animal suffer, right? That you put it down. The article was a little bit unclear as to what it was really focusing on. But the other part of it is, what about other technologies that aren't associated with the actual physical take of that animal, killing that animal?
Do you have an example?
Yeah, well, the article goes through. Well, first of all, it starts off with a picture of two people walking back to a truck, which is different than what was available in the 1800s. And then it goes through and talks about the advent of GPS, and those other types of technology that we use in some locations for hunting, and whether those types of activities or uses should be regulated to affect the probability of success. Well, so other than a firearm, those other things that you might use in the field.
Well, I've got a great example. So in Wyoming this year, there was some discussion at the state legislature on limiting technology in hunting. And specifically, the things that they were talking about limiting were, and here's where it kind of gets murky too: forward-looking infrared, automatic game cameras that sent you, real-time live information about animals, and then guns that could be fired remotely. And so those were the three things that were proposed, that they said, hey, we're going to do legislation about this. But when the debate started, they wanted to talk about accurate rifles instead. And to me, that's where it got really problematic, because I think that's what you're getting at too, right, Davis? I mean, if we're using forward-looking infrared that allows us to see through a group of trees at 1,000 yards and identify every elk in their bed at 1,000 yards because they're blinking red, that's different than a tool that than an accurate rifle. Are we on the same page?
Right. I'm talking like we've banned the use of drones. Right? You can't send a drone out a mile over the woods and try and vertically see where these animals are, and then pursue them. Right. That's viewed as that's been legislated. Same kind of idea that so many states have done. In fact, maybe most states that are saying you can't scout via airplane more than 24, or you have to wait at least 24 hours after doing flyovers before you go out in the field before trying to take an animal. That kind of technology and use of technology versus the type of firearm.
Do you call that technology? Or do you call that method of take?
Well, I call drones are technology, right? That's a technology that people were using to get an advantage, to find out where animals are, to then. I don't know that it's a method of, you're not actually physically taking them.
Because I guess like engineering wise, problem solving engineering wise, put a scientific method, put a problem together, postulate a theory, and then test it, right? And it's like one of the ways you can test a theory or an idea is take it to the extremes. So take the drone example. All right, so here is a tool that we can use that can help us find animals, right, outside of our human awareness zone, right? Like to find animals further away, that allows us to know which direction to go to chase them. Now, from a tool wise, I don't see a lot of difference between the drone and a pair of 12 power Swarovski binoculars.
That drone can get over 1,000 yards of timber and find that animal 1,000 yards away, through timber, right? And maybe you find them bedded on the edge of trees.
So you're saying it breaks the line of sight of the hunter. But I guess my point is, it's just a tool that helps you see or find an animal outside of your ability to see and perceive, right? And so all it is just a tool. That old airplane thing struck home for us. We use that. Like when that was a legal thing here in Wyoming, mm-hmm. I would go jump in an airplane. I'd go fly real quick in the morning one day and go find animals, go park the airplane, follow the rules, go up the next day and, hunt that drainage or hunt that place. And it's like, it didn't mean I didn't have to hike my butt off. All it did is just help me find animals. Right. And we would go in and we had success. Probably 2 or 3 different times we were able to shoot some really nice bulls that we'd found in an airplane. Most of the time in the airplane, you just see really big bulls on private land, but sometimes.
Well, but you can still do that, right? I mean, you can still do that. Yeah, you just have to wait 24 hours.
No, in Wyoming, you cannot, even in the hunting season.
Oh, they banned that recently?
Yeah, it's super banned. Like it's gone.
Okay, I thought it was a 24-hour delay.
And you know, it is what it is. And it's like, okay, so that method of discovering or finding animals is there. But what happens if you take the extreme? It's like, okay, airplanes don't work, drones don't work, right? It's like a lot of guys use side-by-sides to take some of these mountain trails so you can't get up on a car. And so they get an advantage up there, and then they do some glass and some binoculars. It's like they're using tools that aren't necessarily available to everybody. I mean, a $40,000, Polaris isn't attainable for everybody. A $5,000 pair of binoculars isn't attainable for everybody. And so where exactly do we draw the line in saying, okay, you can't do this, but you can do that?
It's an interesting question.
It is. I mean, so the Polaris example, right? I mean, I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong here, I suspect they're taking trails, right? They're taking trails that allow motorized vehicles or are set up for ORV use.
Hope so. Otherwise, they're illegal.
Otherwise, they're being illegal, right? So they're using a legal system of ORV roads to get to a certain point. And frankly, the Polaris one is interesting just because all the data suggests that, I always want people out there driving on their ORVs because the data suggests that elk and deer respond to those negatively and push farther away. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm going to get back in the timber and let them push them to me. But
if I didn't have horses,
I don't know that it gives you a competitive advantage.
If I didn't have horses, I would be like, hey, these guys that ride horse trails up and down, it's like, that's not fair for me as a foot hunter. Like if I don't have horses, you have an advantage over me. So I guess to me, all of those things are just advantages or tools that we have available. And I guess I'm way too libertarian because I'm like, who are you to tell me what I can use or do to achieve what I want to do to fill this tag?
No, that's a really interesting take. I know that, I've heard it. I've like backpack hunters don't like horse hunters. And, Dave hates me because Dave doesn't have binoculars and I do. But, I think it's an interesting, it is.
I love it. While you're out there looking for elk, I'm killing elk. So
yeah.
keep doing
but you see where the problem is. As soon as when the guys come out and say, hey, we're against long range shooting, you have the same problem. I say, well, where does that happen? At what distance is it okay to shoot? And then 1 yard farther, it's not okay to shoot.
So I'm going to spin that back on you and say, what is the distance? And say, how do you decide?
I believe 100% it's based on your hit probability or your capabilities. And my capabilities change based on whether I've been practicing. My capabilities change based on the equipment that I'm using, cartridge, my rifle weight, all those things. And my abilities change based on the environmental conditions. So if it's a very windy shot, I may feel comfortable at 500 to 600 yards. And I may be capable of making that shot happen. If it's a no-win situation, I might be able to take a shot at 1,300 yards.
See, here's what's interesting, and I'm going to philosophically kind of go down a road here. I think we're on the same page. And like, even with, when you use some of these other tools that we talked about, like forward-looking infrared, right? So forward-looking infrared, we were talking to some guys. I've got some friends on the Army Marksmanship Unit who have some really good stuff. And they were saying like, literally they can sit like at the top of a drainage and they can find a herd of elk no matter no matter where they're bedded down at any time of day. And so I feel like that level of technology is different than what you just described to me. And here's what I believe. It's not just the capacity of the rifles that we're talking about in your case. You're talking about a huge amount of skill, time, and investment that you've put into finding and knowing your limitations. Mm-hmm. Like, you know a whole lot more about cartridges than guy A who just bought his rifle off the shelf in Sports' Warehouse. The same thing about your optics, about environmental factors. Like you've invested to have that confidence in being able to reach out there. That to me is different. Just my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think it doesn't matter whether you know or you don't know. Ignorance is not a defense for taking an unethical shot.
I agree.
Absolutely not a defense. And I agree with David's suggestion that we separate those two things, because I think all of us can agree that if you draw down on an animal, doesn't matter whether it's a bow, a spear, a rifle system, pistol, whatever, it's like you need to have confidence and from a position of knowledge that your shot is going to have a very, very good chance of killing that animal cleanly.
So here's another rabbit hole that we haven't really talked about. This is somewhat new to us, isn't it? Even as a species, like the ability to make this ethical choice. If you think about it, like we're talking about 90% probability. You think 200 years ago that people were like worried about their 90% probability that they were choosing not to take that shot?
I think if you've got one shot, you're reloading paper patched round ball, and you're potentially going hungry tonight if you don't make that shot. I guarantee you they made sure they had a high hit probability before they touched off the trigger.
No.
So I'm going to bring up one thing on as far as the maybe it's the fair chase aspect. I don't know. And that's where Boone and Crockett comes from a lot, is on the fair chase aspect. And I know I'm going to be maybe the lone voice on this position, but I think there are times that even if you can make the shot and you have a high hit probability and a high likelihood that you're going to kill that animal, if it's at 1,100 yards, I would still be reluctant to do that. And here's one of the reasons why. It's because of a guy like me. It's because I might, maybe I saw those same elk. Maybe I'm 2 draws up ahead of you and you don't see me, and you've got a clean line of sight at 1,200 yards to that elk, and you can take that shot. And I'm 2 hours into this sneak, and I know all's fair in all's fair in love and hunting, right? And so, especially on public lands, I may just be out of luck if you shoot over my head. But I think there's some risk to. I've had it happen a number of times where I hear that clap of the bullet going over my head, and it's uncomfortable. Like they didn't know I was there. They had no reasonable way to know I was there.
There's no way
anyway.
With the amount of orange vest that you have on that people did not know you were there.
I was there, and it happened, and it was not fun.
No, but my opinion on two things here. Number one, I would challenge, and maybe I'm challenging Aaron, how many people have really taken a shot like that high probability shot at an elk over 1,000 yards? I'm going to say it's not many. And maybe, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, having the capacity, there just aren't many people that really have that skill set and that tool set. Is that accurate, Aaron?
Well, there's at least 25,000 people that have a tool set. I think not just the skill and the tools, but also the conditions.
Yeah.
Like I all those things have to come together for that to be a shot that's probable.
And then the other thing I want to say is I don't think that's fair to say, and that you can't put a number on it. I don't think it's fair to say to somebody that's like, oh, well, because somebody else might not be as skilled as you are, if you've got a shot that you are 100% or 90% confident in, and it's a good shot, it's an ethical shot, that you have a responsibility to pass on that shot to try and set yourself up for a different shot.
David wasn't going that way, and I've just been sitting here thinking about what he said, which is he was postulating that these guys, because it was so far, they weren't able to make a decision about whether that was a safe thing to do or not.
Exactly.
He was saying they were in between. So my question to be, I'm sitting here trying to think of the last set of hunting opportunities I've been involved in where there was long shots, and trying to imagine somebody in between me and the animal where I couldn't see them, where if I took a shot, they were actually in jeopardy. So were you guys in a draw? Were you out on a flat? It's like, if you're out on a flat plane, how could the shooter not see you, not be aware of you?
So it's happened a couple of times, and Mike was actually there for one of them, which is why he mentioned it, because he was on the receiving end of a lot of branches breaking above our heads. We had, in this instance, we were up above them. Mm-hmm. The hunters were down below us, and I don't know how many hundreds of yards below us, but we had a herd of elk that came in between us and them. So they probably couldn't see us because the herd of elk was blocking us in that instance. Like we were behind the elk, and we were in some broken timber, and there were some big rocks. Mm-hmm. And so we're walking through, and you could easily miss us behind trees or rocks. And then the elk could have created an obstruction as well. So they were shooting uphill at those elk.
David, do you think that it could have been the same whether they were 200 yards from the elk or 800 yards from the elk? I mean, there's situations in hunting where you just can't see everything. And so I think there are
but there's an exception here.
So these guys were firing, and as I'm ducking behind a rock, Dave is out in the open waving his arms in blaze orange saying, "Stop, stop." And they're yelling at us, get out of the way, as they continue to fire. So you can have that.
Yeah. That was the extreme version. That was the extreme version that we faced, of where we were
to take it. Yeah.
They were actually just
you're trying to loop idiots into the categories of long range hunters. And
you said we had to take things to its grandest extreme.
Right. We're providing you one extreme.
But I'm saying idiots are unsafe whether they're 100 yards or 5,000 yards.
Right. But my point was, in this type of a situation, and I've experienced a couple of other situations that aren't dissimilar at a much farther range, where it's if you are not absolutely 100% certain of what's behind that animal, even if you could make a kill shot, even if you have comfort in your kill shot, you don't know what's behind that. You still shouldn't take that shot.
That's hunter safety 101, man. It's like, if you don't take shots where that bullet has a chance to go places that you don't know. That has nothing to do with range.
But I think the farther that animal is away, the harder it is to make that assessment.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I honestly tend to disagree, and I'll tell you why I tend to disagree. Would you say that you take more time to shoot at an animal at 350 yards or 30 yards?
Situation dependent.
I'm going to say it's usually 350 yards. In fact, I've gotten to the point where I won't take fast shots anymore. Bad things happen.
Which means you don't get close. It's like, I trained all my kids to hunt. We don't shoot at 200, 300 yards, because what happens is you force a situation, animals get awareness, animals move off. You don't have as much time to get people steady, to get the bugs worked out, to dry fire. It's like, we're way more ethical taking shots with 12-year-old kids at 500 yards than all the adults that go out there and jump shoot deer at 250 yards and try to shoot something on the run or shoot something moving. Like taking more time. And make another argument. If you're close, look at field of view. Like, if you're far, you have a huge field. You can see everything on the hillside.
Yeah, my mistakes happen when I've made them, and my mistakes happen. And it's not safety mistakes, but my mistakes where animals haven't been hit where they should have been and gone down immediately happen when I press the time, and that always happens when I jump something, when they're aware of my presence immediately. And unfortunately, that's one of the areas where I will disagree with people who are, kind of this argument that you need to be close enough that the idea that I have to bump an animal or scare an animal before I take a shot at an animal, that it's somehow unethical to shoot an animal that's unaware of my proximity. I disagree. Like, I think now, if we're playing some kind of a sports game, then, like chess, where, okay, I can see your argument. But if you're talking about trying to one shot kill dead right there, in my mind, I think the argument falls apart. And so that's why I'm saying I don't think it's always range dependent. So that's all.
Well, I'm gonna put another wrinkle on this, because I do think it's a little unfair to assume that because I'm one of those guys that takes 50, 40, 50 yard shots all the time.
Yep.
And it's not that I'm jump shooting. It's not that they're on the run. Like my shots they're bedded down, or I sneak up on them. I've put them to bed and I put a big sneak up on them and they have no idea I'm there at 50 yards. And I'm able to assess the situation just as much as you are at 500 yards, right? At 40 yards, because it's not like I'm trying to jump one off of a bed and shoot it. I've saw one at 1,000 yards and I'm putting it to bed and I'm going to put a sneak on it for 3 hours. And I'm going to shoot it on its bed.
Yeah,
and I know that
David, for every, so you're assigning a few cases of errant shots or unsafe shooting at long range and saying, well, all long range tends to be this way. But I would argue a lot of guys that do exactly what you're doing, they get that close and blow it. It's like they take the shot anyways. Just like the guys at 400 or 500 yards that don't have rangefinders, that don't have drop compensating turrets. It's like they just hold over and they take the shot anyways. So yeah, you might wait and only shoot still animals and get as close as possible. But for you, there's 10 more guys that do it the wrong way, just like there is in long range. For every one of those guys that does it right and makes a good shot, there's dozens of guys that don't. And it doesn't matter whether it's close or far. People that don't follow the rules of ethics, right? And maybe just that one simple rule of don't shoot unless you have a very high probability of hitting that animal. If they're not willing to follow that rule, it doesn't matter how far it is. It's like they can make it bad no matter what.
Now I do hope that we can reverse that ratio that you were just mentioning, because I like to think that the best in all people. So I like to think that, for every 9 people that do it the way I do, there's one that maybe doesn't, or, vice versa. For every 9 people the way that you do, there's one that doesn't.
I hate to tell you this, Dave, but think about the average person and how dumb they are, and remember that 50% of people are dumber than that.
Hey, no, I want to put the good in people, and I definitely want to put the good in the hunting community, and not suggest that 90% of all hunters either way on long distance or up close are doing it wrong.
We do regulate for the lower half that Nephi's talking about, but and I think we're also having a very Western conversation around big game hunting. And there's a whole segment of the United States that this is not an issue.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people who were like, as soon as we said 200 yards, they think that they're like, oh my gosh.
Like, what is that?
Unbelievable.
Yeah. But those are also the folks who get a lifetime tag out West, and then they come in and they're under the pressure based upon what they're seeing in magazines that they need to be able to hit 1,000 yards, but haven't had the opportunity to test it out and practice at their facilities. So, we've got different things going on here with people's skill sets and abilities to even train up to that.
So let me focus on, I wanted to mention one thing on that article. I think the parts of the article that maybe we individually took exception to might've been different. Here's one piece that I struggled with a little bit. I've been hunting the same unit for elk now for almost
80
I'm not going to
years.
say how long. I'm not going to say quite how long, but it's been a long time, more than 25 years, right? The same unit. The success rate from the time I started hunting in that unit, from the time I started hunting until today is almost exactly the same. It's within the margin of error, like 1 or 2 percentage points different. The elk population in that unit from when I started to today is up by something like 25%. The technology in that time frame has improved dramatically. And so the part I struggled with is trying to create a connection between improvements in technology increasing to overall increases in harvest rate or success rate. When at the end of the day, technology helps complete the job. But if you don't know the basics of how to track, what types of habitats the animal likes to be in and when, how to be quiet, like the very basic fundamentals of hunting, no technology is going to fix that for you. And what's proven out by the data, at least in my area, is that technology hasn't fixed that for people. You still have to, the animals still move over large landscapes. The conditions change on the ground. You can't account for huge blizzards or fire or other things that might impact animal movements, right? And through technology, and it really hasn't impacted the harvest rate. At least that. So would be my assessment.
What number? And I would agree that we shouldn't just take somebody's idea as a fact, because maybe it doesn't increase the success rate, but it has to have an effect somewhere. So my question would be, do you think that maybe it just decreases the amount of time that we have to spend to be successful? Maybe that 10% statistic is just, there's 10% of us that are diehards that are going to go home punching our tag.
No, the numbers a day per harvest stayed roughly the same too. What I don't have data on, which I think would be interesting, is if improvements in technology have actually decreased the loss rate.
And I'm going to say
because that's one thing that we haven't talked about, is as much as we try to avoid it every year, and it's built into the allocation, license allocations, is there's a certain number of animals, whatever that happens to be, that are going to be wounded and
lost,
die and not recovered. Right? And we don't like to talk about that, but it's something that happens, not just with big game, but with birds. I mean, it happens. And the question is, and I don't know if this has been studied, maybe you guys know, is have improvements in technology actually reduce the loss rate, which then would increase the opportunity for everybody else, right? Sort of have an inverse effect on it could create more opportunity by improving technology and reducing loss rate.
Well, it's reduced it for me, and I'll let somebody else talk. Because I know from being a beginning hunter, I know the shots that I've taken that I wish I had back and that are unknown, the results of those shots. And I know that I take a lot less of them now, and I know that I'm using better gear now and that I have a better skill set now. So that's just my 2 cents.
Aaron, you got any thoughts on that?
I was just thinking, I'm on the north side of 500 animals that I've killed in the last 15 years. So I was just kind of rolling through and see if I could draw some conclusions about, my abilities. It's like, I think I've started shooting a little bit closer. Personally, I think over the last 4 or 5 years, I bet my average shot distance has been closer than 8 years ago. And, but still, I'll bet my average shot distance is still in that 700-800 yard range.
So I have a question.
And that's funny, because my last 10 elk combined probably don't reach 700-800 yards.
Days are like mine's 7 or 8 yards.
Just different styles.
No, this brings up something though. You said that 700 or 800 yards, but here's, we talked about two things, and Dave kind of hit on when we talked about the success rate. We talked about both about being a better hunter and being a better shooter. And I want to talk about both because I think one of those skill sets is easier to build up than the other. I, won't express which one first.
Hold on a sec. Let's define what being a good hunter is.
Absolutely.
I would say being a good hunter means that you punch your tag.
Sure.
The whole point of hunting is to harvest an animal. If you want to go on a nature hike, you can get like nature hiking badges and all sorts of cool birding things. And like I summited this point, and there's all these other metrics, but like when you're hunting, the goal is to cut the tag.
So that's a great definition. So let's say that's it. It's hunter success rate. So how do you become, and which do we want to start on? How to become a better shooter or how to become a better hunter? Where do we start? And we're going to start on hunter because here's why. I've watched you on video a couple of things, I'll pull up something on YouTube and I'll see you setting up on an animal. And regardless of whether or not at, X number of yardage, even if you put you and I equal at X number of yardage, I've watched you set up. You set up better than I do. So a certain spot on a hill, knowing the wind on the opposite hillside, knowing where you can get prone versus where you're going to have to take a sitting shot. Those are things that you know better than me. And so I would qualify that as learning to be a better hunter because you're going to be more successful.
It's skills, and it's different than the skills that maybe some people equate with being a good hunter, which would be like, a stalking or something like that, calling, whatever.
Which all those things I think play in it. So how does somebody get to be a better hunter?
It's a good question. I just spent this last week teaching at our long range university. Generally, we have lots of instructors, and just because of our schedule and time this year, they've had to recruit the third string instructors. But I was teaching these guys this week, and it's funny, you see our spectrum of students. It's like we go from 25-year-old to 68-year-old in this whole classroom. Like there's guys in there that have been shooting longer than I've been alive, and yet we're going to try to bring them something to teach. But it's just mentioning that, it was funny because I think that one of the most significant skills that you can develop as a shooter, right, when you're trying to be successful in the hunt, is to know where to shoot from, to know how to get set up. So Nephi is actually bringing up something that I have a lot of passion for and a lot of belief in as one of those hunter skills. And that's kind of knowing your equipment, knowing your limitations. And I think going to trainings, like guys that will invest the time and the money to go get trained, I think that's a great experience. We run this experience in New Mexico, and that's where all our other guys were at. Was we went to the NRA Whittington Center, did the same thing, did a training exercise, and then we went out afterwards and went on an antelope hunt. And those shots range from 50 yards to for forever, right? And it's like, what's the setup and what's the terrain and how and fail? And we send our guys out with them, and hopefully they point out successes and failures in incorporating their education into that opportunity. But literally that's what we have to do is to go on a journey and to get out there and do things. And when you have failures, identify why.
So I actually appreciate some of what you're saying. I think one of the hardest parts about being a hunter is being able to shoot in the various conditions you're going to encounter, and having does some of what you do deal with training to deal with the types of conditions, not just wind, but other types of conditions, angles, other weather that you might encounter when you're out in the field?
We don't teach fieldcraft in our courses necessarily. What we teach is shooting skill. So that's everything from like the shooter's equipment management and setup and abilities to mostly the science of the things that you don't know. Because I think it's completely, I said this before, it's completely unacceptable to take a shot in ignorance and blame chance on a miss. So if you don't know, then you shouldn't shoot. So I'm 100% against wounded animals and against bad shots. Absolutely. At the same time, I don't have any ethical boundary or limitation on how far I'm willing to shoot. There's no cap.
Your cap's not yardage based. Your cap is skills, experience, conditions based.
Yeah, hit probability based.
So
I just haven't figured out how to shoot 2 miles yet.
So if somebody wants to take one of these courses from you, is it open to anybody?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do they do it? How do they go about doing it?
Go to the website and Gunwerks and just book one, or call in and we'll find a schedule that works. We run at our Cody area from May through October basically, and we'll do a little end of October, November, December stuff in association with some cow elk hunting, if we can coordinate it up here in the mountains. And I really like putting training events with a hunt or with some type of field situation, because we can always find ways to show people what they don't know, right? We can break them. And to me, it's like understanding where your limitations are is why you practice. Like it's not just about, getting better. It's literally, what is the limit? What is the boundary? And if you're not willing to put the time into practice and you're not willing to find those boundaries, then how do you know what you should or shouldn't do?
Yeah, we both have a mutual acquaintance who, when I started getting into long range shooting, who basically said, you would never take, you stretch everything, like first shots, you're taking those shots on steel, then you're taking those shots at prairie dogs, then you're taking those types of shots at coyotes, and you're never taking these untested shots, and you'd never take, you'd never test your skill on, a giant bull elk. It's just not going to work. And so I love that approach of testing your skills and working your way up in improving your skill set. I think it's extremely important. So if I was going to come take a Gunwerks class, one more question for me, but I already know the answer to it. So I'm a guy who maybe I don't have this, maybe I don't have the right gear, right? Maybe, I'm wondering.
No. So Gunwerks class, level 1 class, basically we teach you how to go pick good gear and how to set it up correctly. So you should have all the fundamental science and knowledge and capability to pick a good rifle, to pick a good scope, to know how to put it together and know how to do your ballistics so that when you measure a shot at 500 yards, you can correct for that, you can take that shot. And we'll put you in shooting situations where you know that, geez, 500 is pretty easy, but 800 is a whole different story.
Absolutely. I think you actually answered my second question already. Was I was going to say, how do you become? So the first one was, how do you become a better hunter? And I don't think there's nothing but experience. That's kind of my take home.
Hey, I think mentorship is it seems like a dying cultural thing, and where I think if we could get back into more mentorship and bringing more people, being more inclusive, I think that's an excellent way. Now, I've raised 6 kids, and I've taken all of them hunting. Some of them it sticks better than others. It's like that I haven't done a good job maybe in mentorship with other people, but at least in that small group that I have, bringing those guys into it and teaching them how to shoot well and teaching them, and kind of an unrelenting expectation of that perfect shot. Teaching them how to find the animals and how to get set up right and how to be successful. I think mentorship is probably the best way to pass that on.
That's awesome. And then I think the second one was how to become a better shooter. And we covered some of the things you can do. You can take a class. You can learn from other people. Is there anything else? So if you were to take Mike McGrady, who's sitting there at his computer right now, and say, Mike's like, well, I want to be a better shooter this year, and I've got a month and a half till I have to go fill my tag, and I don't have enough time to take a class. What are you going to tell that guy about improving?
Yeah. Figuring I start from zero.
Yeah. How does he start down the road of becoming a better shooter for this year? Is there anything he can do in the next couple months?
We do not have enough time. I think the bottom line is maybe you're not going to magically transform yourself into this great shot. But my question would be, Mike, how far do you feel comfortable shooting? If we're putting $100 on every shot on a paper plate, how far are you willing to shoot at that paper plate?
Good, solid 50, 100 yards.
Yeah. I mean, that's the question. So if you practice, can you push that a little farther? Your limitation isn't in technology. Your limitation is in equipment management, setup, and breaking the trigger and just marksmanship fundamentals. So marksmanship fundamentals are really easy to research and search online. Video series, there's hundreds of people that are glad to tell you how to shoot better. And if I would say probably the number one thing I would recommend anybody to become a better shot is get your rifle steady. Offhand shots are crazy, man. It's like figure out a way to get steady. Rest the front of the rifle on something that's steady, and then figure out a way to get a rear rest. So you want to improve your shooting. If you're at that level, it's like get a rear rest. That will increase your abilities significantly. If you start getting into the region of shooting 300 yards plus, to where the predicting the bullet drop becomes your limitation, now that's where we come in.
So now I'm going to ask you a couple questions. So when you go into the field, you said get a rear rest. what tools do you carry with you into the field for shooting, or what tools do you recommend that the average hunter take and learn to use?
I literally, if it's 100 yards, I'm looking for a place to get prone. I have a hard time breaking a shot on my gun when my crosshairs aren't steady. So for me, I'm trying for prone shooting, and I don't like 100-yard shots just because like stuff happens too fast, and sometimes you make hasty decisions that yield results that are not what we expect. So for me, I'm going to try to get a setup that'll give me a 300 to 600-yard shot where I have time to set up where I can shoot from prone. So I'm going to have a bipod and I'm going to have a rear bag. Rear bag's going to be the size of a quart jar, maybe a little bit smaller, and it's going to be fairly light. So I'm not going to pay a big weight penalty. But those are the two tools that I'm going to use. I'm going to have a wind meter and I'm going to have a rangefinder. And at least one shot.
At least one bullet.
Yeah.
No, I think it's so interesting because I'm going to say that most people, again, even people who are Western hunters, when they hear this and they hear that that is the distance that you look to set up a shot in, I bet a lot of people are surprised. Having said that, and this is maybe why I'm, it's the wrong guy to ask, I feel the same way. I've had more bad shots less than 300 yards away. And whenever I've been in that window that you just mentioned, good things happen to me in that window. And that's just,
I've got lots of data points, but you can go to somebody like our good buddies at Ensign Ranches, Western Lands, and you go look at some old videos they used to produce, and they had George Strait hunting there and a couple that are really cool dudes. And you watch these videos and they were all shooting 33-78s. And so they would go out there, they'd find these big mule deer in the sagebrush, they'd go start making a stalk. And basically the way the stalk would go is they would get as close as they could until they busted the animal, and then they would start unloading. And I would watch them shoot on video. Like they didn't even, who knows what was cut out of this thing, but on video, they would dump a couple magazines worth of shots at an animal. And we did our first training school down there. These guys were awesome early adopters, some really cool guides. All those guys were awesome. And what happened was they started getting a couple guns from us, and then they would start shooting at a 500-yard gong with their clients when the clients would show up, and their clients would have these big magnums. Well, they would shoot with a client and they would get the 6.5 284 out and shoot with the client with one of our guns, and the guys would hit at 500 yards. Well, then pretty quick, they stopped trying to go in there until the animal jumps and then shoot hasty or unsupported. And they would get that client within 500 yards very carefully. And they would take lots of time to get set up and make sure they're super steady, dry fire a couple times, and then they would take one shot. And now you watch the videos of how they hunt and kill now versus how they did before. And it's the contrast is striking. And to me, it's so much cleaner. And again, that's all we do is train guys. And I see guys of all walks of life and absolutely guarantee that 500-yard shots are doable and ethical for anybody.
What do you think the piece of technology, or if you had to say now, let's back on technology, what has made that possible? What do you think?
Laser rangefinders.
Laser rangefinders.
Laser rangefinder, 1996, Bushnell introduced the first one, then Leica followed. That is the product that allows us to apply the known science of external ballistics. If you don't have the distance, then you can't do the calculations. We've been able to do calculations for 100 years plus, easy. So now that you can measure the distance, now we can take away that uncertainty. You can plug the variables into a solver and get a solution. So the elevation correction and a windage solution becomes attainable.
So I think I try and press this home to people and stop me when I'm wrong. There's been kind of a paradigm shift where people, to make that accuracy count long range wise, in the past, shooting point blank, there was this thought that you really had to go magnum. You're super fast because you were
and you didn't have high BC bullets either, right? I mean, the focus wasn't on the ballistic coefficient; it was on increasing velocity. So this paradigm is, rangefinder and solver, but also at the same time, we've had this massive shift in our industry to higher ballistic coefficient bullets, which essentially yields the same performance at distance, but it does it with less recoil. One of my big things that I've tried to affect the industry on is to get away from big magnums. because more people shoot poorly from shooting cartridges that are too big than any other reason. And you could probably almost extrapolate that and say there's more wounded animals from cartridges that are too big than any other reason. Guys come to our training school and they shoot 6.5 Creedmoors and they're like, man, how far can I kill an elk with this? I'm like, well, let's temper our enthusiasm a little, because here's the tools that we can use to decide how terminal performance goes. But they recognize that they're able to place those bullets so precisely, so accurately, that they start chasing the smaller cartridge.
Yeah, a lot of people make fun of me because I'm such a 6.5 fan now, but I will say I hunt, if I think it's a big elk, I'm 7mm Rem Mag, but 6.5, I told Mike, he was asking about cartridges. I said, like, here's my take. At ethical distances where you're likely to want to shoot an elk at, as far as your comfort factor is going to go, that 140 grain ish 6.5 bullet it's pretty amazing how much energy you get out of that compared, you can compare it to, and I picked on Dave for this. I've done the ballistics with Dave's 150 grain on his 30-06. And once you get out
165,
once you get out there a couple hundred yards, the 6.5's overperforming it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of misunderstandings about what exactly creates terminal performance that is acceptable. That is one of the big topics that we cover in our class, and we'd really dive into the true science behind that. I'm kind of a nerd about that segment, but the wound cavity that's required to ethically harvest an animal is way smaller than we think that it is. And the number one thing that we can do to drive good terminal performance is just put the bullet where it's supposed to go. That's where we always make mistakes. It's not the bullet wasn't the right one or the cartridge wasn't big enough or whatever. It's you just got to put it in the right spot.
Fair enough. As soon as I can put my scope on that 6.5, sounds like I got a place to go learn.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's a dig
like
at me.
No. I'm just saying. I picked one up and now I need to fully outfit it. And I mean, it's not going to be in time probably for this season, but
it is.
That's all right.
It takes 2 hours to tune a whole gun up, man. It's 2 hours.
Yeah, not the way I do it.
I got boxes. I got loaner ammo and an optic over here for you.
Loaner ammo? How does that work?
Loaner ammo. I'll be right over.
You have '06. You're out of luck.
I will give you the box back.
But I told Mike to get a 6.5 Creedmoor, and it just so happens that I have mountains of 6.5 Creedmoor ammo, and I wanted Mike to shoot it. So I said, I will help you with this. You're going to love this gun. So he bought the caliber I told him to get. And so now I'm going to make sure that I get him lined out with the right bullets. It's all working like a clock, because I'm working to bring Dave around to this too, which is much longer. So Mike is kind of my intermediate step. See, if I can get Mike on board with me, then Dave starts to feel peer pressure from two of us, and it makes it more likely that I can drag him away too. Sooner or later, Dave's going to have a scope with magnification.
Mine has magnification. It just gets harder to see when you magnify it.
More yellow.
Yeah.
Fuzzy.
Everything just turns black.
Well, Dave, you have any more questions?
I don't. Mike, do you have more questions?
I don't. I think that final one is really what I'm interested in for a person who has been on that many successful hunts in this short, period of time. It's impressive.
Yeah, when you said 500 animals in the past 15 years or whatever it was, are you talking
jealous.
Well, first of all, are we talking all big game, or like if I'm adding up my doves, it's probably way more. But
Yeah. So what we've been doing is this Africa trip, and we go to Southeastern Cape of South Africa. And I've got a good friend that we've developed over the years there. And I'll go over there, and now it's like there might be a half dozen trophy animals that get hunted, but on that same trip, we might do a bunch of culling. And I really, really, really am enthusiastic about the way the game management works over in South Africa. And hopefully that the political climate doesn't completely destroy that. But the clear financial incentive to create and provide habitat for animals and the rewards and benefits that come from that to the hunter, to the naturalist, to the animals themselves is tangible, and it's evident, and it's right in front of you. Well, the a lot of the East Cape and then into the desert is just like hunting out in the West. So it's big, wide open, expansive places. And so we take at least 2 groups of people over every year, except for this year. This is the first time in about 8 years that I haven't gone. But you go over there, and there's a chance where you might do some work and put 50 animals plus in the bag, in the meat shack, in a trip. So anywhere 10 to 15 trophies, and then you do another 10 to 15 cull animals, and all of a sudden that's 30 animals a year. I've been fortunate enough to be able to do this for a living since 2006, and we film a TV program. So you talk about the requirements to shoot good. Imagine putting a camera behind it and publishing what you actually do. How many of us would feel good about exposing that to the world for criticism? But that opportunity has afforded me the ability to hunt for work, to collect that information and try to teach and show people what they can do. And so I've been able to do several excellent big game hunting trips every fall as well. So it adds up.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I've never done an African hunt.
God, it's so fun. And there's so many animals, and it's so changeable.
Yeah, I've heard that. It's a bucket list to get over there for sure.
Sounds like your company party, your mountain.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
I was going to start this show off by saying it must be really tough to have to hunt in Hawaii. So maybe I'll throw that out right now at you, just because you dropped the Africa bomb. So I wanted to say, it must be hard. It must be hard. With that, I'll let Dave ask his next question.
Well, you got to give Aaron a chance to respond to that.
Dude, Mauna Kea is 16,000 feet elevation from zero at sea level. Like, it can be a son of a gun, man.
It just looks like you're really not enjoying yourself very much. So next time, if you need somebody to go instead, I'll keep it in mind.
I'll keep it in mind.
I'll go for you.
Yeah. When people say I'll keep it in mind, I usually know what the answer is.
I kind of said it with that tone of voice, didn't I?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna take somebody that wears a swimsuit and in other words, a bikini swimsuit. I'm not gonna take Nephi.
Done.
Nephi can be persuaded for a good hunt. If that's the price of admission, I'm sure he would accommodate.
Sometimes you got to sacrifice your principles, Dave.
That's right. Nephi will go topless, so we'll be good.
So Aaron, I really appreciate you taking all this time with us today. I have one more question we ask everybody that comes on this podcast. We like to finish it up with our guests, and it's Your Mountain Podcast. We're talking about land, water, wildlife, and the things that happen on all of our land, water, and wildlife, and all the experiences we have or that we share. And we just want to know, what's your mountain? What's do you have that place that's just extra special to you, physical, metaphorical, doesn't matter, whatever it is.
You mean in the sense of that special place, or in the sense of what's that thing that you're trying to climb to summit or to achieve?
It can be either. It's traditionally, it's more of what's that special place to you. More along the lines of that special place, but take it any way you want to.
Yeah, it's whatever it is to you today. When you hear us say, what is your mountain? It's like immediately, what comes to your mind?
Man, when I think of what's my mountain, I'm thinking of that hike. Like, everybody's been there. You've got 2,000 feet of elevation to climb, and you're just slogging away to get to the top. To me, when I think of what's your mountain, that's what I think of. And to me, like, my life's work, like everything that I've dedicated every minute of my existence for the past decade, has been how to help people shoot better and achieve more. So we had a really appropriate talk today about technology and hunting and ethics. And I'm telling you that my mountain is, how do we get people to be able to shoot farther but also to be able to shoot better, to be successful, to be ethical, to make those shots. That's my mountain.
Well, if people take nothing else away from today, I hope that's it right there. Is that you should always be trying to become a better shooter, better at your craft. Nobody is perfect, and there's always room to get better. And you keep practicing and keep working on your craft, and you're going to be a more effective hunter as a result as well.
Yeah, even if it's just 100 yards, like Dave.
Hey, I might. Last year, I ranged the elk at, I think it was 272. That was big time.
Impressive.
That was big time. Anyway,
I don't know if my rangefinder goes that far. Like, I'd have to pull out the manual.
Well, you're the last elk I helped you pack out was at 10 yards, Mike. So
yeah, not the first shot. It's like 10 feet. I was afraid it was going to kick
more
me.
Self-defense than
Yeah.
Lots of time to plan that shot there, Mike.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Actually, it just sort of wandered down to you, didn't it?
It did. And then stopped right next to me. Just started eating some grass. So I was like, well, I guess he doesn't know I'm here. So,
maybe he's seen you shoot.
yeah, exactly.
He thought it was safer the closer he got.
It was a dare. He just had his middle hoof up.
Good discussion, guys. Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate being invited on.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And for everybody out there listening, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.